Hi everybody, thanks for watching Horology Project. My name is Kevin. I want to take the time to ask you to like and subscribe. Here we have my next video that I'm really excited about. I launched my first video last week on the Timex Q. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my first ever video on YouTube. I'm following it up with this video on the Tudor Black Bay Heritage. So why do you see two of the same watches right in front of you? For my eagle-eyed viewers out there, you would be quick to mention that even though these are two of the same watches, they're actually different iterations. One has a rose and the other has a shield. Here is the rose version. Beautiful watch. And the shield version, also gorgeous looking watch. So I've been saving up for a Tudor for a while, and I finally had enough money to buy it, but I couldn't decide whether I wanted to go with the rose or the shield version. So I did what every logical person who has a watch habit does. I bought both of them. I'm going to be selling off one of these watches, whichever I decide to keep. Let me go ahead and preface this before we go in. This shield is the newer version. Let me just say that as far as tech specs are concerned, this is the better watch. It has a better movement, it's anti-magnetic, it has free balance, it has a longer power reserve. Everything about this watch as far as the movement is technically better than this older discontinued version. Even the winding feels better on this watch, but I'll get into that. So why would I even consider this older ETA version? Let's talk about that. This ETA version right here has the rose, as I've mentioned before. It also nods back to an older time by mentioning that it is a rotor self-winding. So even though these two have 3 lines of text, this last text has the classic smiley face, which is a nod to the past. So this watch, with its 3 text, is a little bit more heritage inspired, which I like that. I like that a lot. With the ETA movement, it has 38 hours of power reserve. Now that ETA movement is a very common and classic movement. It's placed in a lot of watches in all price range, but typically watches under the $2,000 price range will have that movement inside of it. It's an older movement, but it's been proven to be a great workhorse, which actually brings me to one of my points on why this watch can be a better option for you. Because it is a very common movement, it is easily serviceable by watchmakers that have a small level of competence, really. It's so classic that you're not throwing a curveball at a watchmaker with this movement. This movement is a little newer. It's Tudor's in-house movement. So what does that bring? Like I said, it brings the anti-magnetic quality of it. So you don't have to worry because it has a silicone hairspring of it magnetizing and losing its time. The movement inside of it is known as the MT5602. It's a Cox certified movement, which means that it is a chronometer grade movement that has been regulated to have a precision guarantee of -4 and +6. I went to my watchmaker today to verify, since I bought these watches secondhand, how well this movement is running. And even though I believe this watch is a year or 2 old, it is running ±1 second. That's phenomenal for a movement to be running well. Now, this ETA movement I also put under the time graph, and this is only running at +2, so not too bad. Both are running really, really well. So why would I favor this older ETA? That's the $100 question. Why should you maybe favor this older ETA? I think there are two main reasons. Reason number one, this is the discontinued version. As time goes by, this version is going to be harder to come by. There's going to be more of this version in circulation. There's going to be less of these versions in circulation as people lose, damage, stop keeping track of their watch, or they break down and just go in the garbage. So because of that, this will eventually be the rarer watch to have. Is it collectible enough for you to make a decent penny on it? I'm not convinced of that, but they are technically trading right now a little higher than their in-house counterparts, despite the fact that the in-house movement is technically the better watch. Reason number two, and perhaps the most important reason of all, on why this watch could maybe be better for you is, as I've kind of mentioned already, this watch will most likely be the easier one to service, and because of that, it'll also probably be the cheaper one to service. Now, we're talking over the course of a 5-year period. Some people go up to 7 years before they service their watch. I don't think it's going to be, you're going to save so much money that you should make a decision on that alone, but it will be cheaper. Last reason, and I think this may be the most important reason for the average person, at least the more small-wristed person, is that even though both of these watches are 41 millimeter in diameter, 50 millimeter lug to lug, 22 millimeter in lug width, and are in very many ways the same watch, this watch is much thinner. Unfortunately, I don't think the camera can pick on it too much. I'm going to try to go ahead and bring the camera down and see if you can take a notice of it. But this watch on my left, the ETA version, as you can see, is over 2 millimeters thinner. And you can see that very well as I show you the profile of the watch. These are identical NATO straps. And the one on the right, which is the in-house, is sitting proud, while the ETA version is sitting closer to the strap itself and would be closer to your wrist. That's really important. We all know that these Black Bay Heritage are a little bit bigger. They're more modern sized. And I think that 2 millimeters does make a difference, which is why I was willing to even consider this watch in the first place. Truth be told, I do want to like this watch better, but because I have a smaller wrist, just over 6.5 millimeters, I decided that I needed to try them both on for myself. And chances are you're feeling very similar as well. So here you have it. I'm just going to go ahead and hold the band. I'm not going to secure it. And as you can see from my profile here, let me just move the camera again. This watch sits very close to my wrist. Very close. Hardly any gap at all. And mind you, this has a NATO strap on. So a NATO strap is going to create a little bit of distance from your wrist to the watch. And look, even with the NATO strap on, there is almost no distance at all. I like that. I like the fact that there isn't much distance on this watch. That with my 6.5 inch wrist, even though this watch is proportionately bigger than most watches, it still looks slim. I don't need to buy a Black Bay 58, which is great because I don't want to spend over $3,000. The secondhand market on these watches are a phenomenal price. I don't know if you can really find much more value for money to get into the house of Rolex for a watch that are usually trading in the low twos. So I think the price is great for this watch, and I love how it wears. I love that the ETA version is so tight on the wrists. But like I said, I want to like the Tudor Shield version. But right now I'm not sure if the tech specs and the in-house movement are enough to change the tide for me. I really do care about how a watch looks on my wrist. After all, we're spending this kind of money. Chances are, if you're spending this kind of money, I know I am, is because they're pieces that we enjoy to see on our wrist. And here you have it. You'll notice what a difference. It still wears pretty good, but not as good, or at least not as close to my wrist. There's a little bit more of a gap, and some people would call this gap too big, and they would say that it would seesaw the watch a little bit. Now, I do have the watch with a camera, and the camera always makes the watch look bigger than it is, wear bigger than it is, but this watch has some gaps. The difference in thickness brings the ETA version measuring in at 12.7 millimeters. This version, the in-house version, is measuring at 14.8 millimeters. That's 2.1 millimeters difference. Let's see if we can take a look of that in the profile. Now, I did get these watches secondhand. Whoops, sorry about that. Now, I did get these watches secondhand, so there are a little bit of scratches. But as you can see, the ETA version is almost completely flat when it comes to the case back. And the in-house version definitely protrudes outside of the watch. And that's where you're seeing the case thickness. The case is actually slabbed on the sides at the same measurement. It's just that case back that is different on the watch. Doesn't look too much, but trust me, it's there. Now, it is worth noting that I strategically put these on the NATO strap. One, because I don't have the steel for both of them, but two, because if you ever put the NATO strap on, you are going to notice the most. You're going to notice the thickness difference the most. If this watch is on a steel bracelet, which I've tried both of them on the same exact steel bracelet, this back portion will sink into your wrist. You won't notice the difference as much. That's not true when you're wearing the NATO strap, but it will sink in your wrist. And the difference between this version and this version become nominal at that point. It's not really that big of a difference at that point. But this one will still be the slimmer profiled watch because it will go more into your wrist. Now, because the back side of this does protrude out a little bit, I did find it a little less comfortable than the ETA version. The ETA version wears flatter on the wrist, with the backside almost being completely flat. So because of that, you feel more of the case on your wrist versus feeling, the case back on your wrist. You feel more of the case back on your wrist with this watch versus the case itself. And I found this to be more comfortable versus wearing the case back. Both of these watches outside of that function pretty similar. The bezel on it is very stiff, and I'll be honest, it's a little too stiff for my liking. but not stiff enough to where I'm not going to keep this watch. I love it. I love it. But typically there's always going to be something that you're not over the moon about. And I rather have a little bit extra stiffness with this kind of bezel action than no stiffness and a very loose bezel. This has very, very good bezel action. Now with the NATO, it is not that difficult to turn. However, if you are wearing the steel bracelet, the only spots that you can turn it well are from these angles right here. And that is where it gets a little hard. That's why this bezel isn't my favorite. If they had cut the bezel out a little bit more and it came off the case a little bit more, it would have increased the size, or at least maybe they could have shrunk down this case size a little bit, then that overhang would have made it ever so easier to be able to turn, because as it is a bit difficult to turn at the diagonal points. So if you're wearing that steel bracelet, just prepare yourself to know it is a little bit difficult to turn. Now I'm going to do another watch video where I get deeply into each one of these watches on an individual basis, but let me just offer one more comparison, since this video is more concerned with comparing to the two watches. So I've already mentioned the dial differences, this one having the rose, this one having the shield, and the writing just being a little bit different, this one being the more playful nod to the past, this one being a little bit closer to what you would expect in a Rolex watch, having the chronometer rating on there, and Rolex is known for putting the superlative chronometer certification there. But let me go ahead and point to one other difference. So outside of those details and the thickness, there is a different feeling when it comes to the crown. This winding feels amazing on the ETA. It is phenomenal. It's smooth. It's classy. It's what you want a watch to feel like. It's among the best that I've ever wound. I will say that this version, for whatever reason, getting the crown in doesn't feel as good as this in-house version, but I did buy this watch used, so it could just be an issue of that. However, let's see if I can get this back in. Putting this ETA version aside, this watch, I didn't think it could get better, but the winding on this watch is absolutely impeccable. It almost feels like you're not even winding a watch at all. It almost feels like it's free moving. It feels phenomenal. It is the smoothest watch I've ever wound. I have an older Rolex Explorer 2, and both of these watches, but this watch in particular blows that out of the water. This is a dream to wind. And there is less kind of play in the crown when it pops out. It pops right into position that it needs to be, and then you can pop it again to start adjusting the hands. This watch kind of has that classic when you pop it out. There we go, it's popped out. Like if you give it a wind or half wind, it pops out again, and then you can bring it to where it needs to be. For whatever reason, I've had some 2824s in the past, and they do that. This one just pops right into play. You can feel that this is a better movement all around. You really can. But as I've said earlier, this watch I think looks better on the wrist. So for me, I have some hard decision making to make if I'm going to end up keeping the ETA, keeping the in-house. Right now, I'm leaning towards the ETA because I have a smaller wrist. but I wouldn't be surprised if I changed my mind. Let me offer one more opinion, and I'll just have some closing thoughts. Even though this has the better movement and it's rated at 70 hours, which is just amazing, this is only a three-handed watch, and there's no other complications outside of that. Doesn't have a date wheel, doesn't have a day feature, doesn't have AM, doesn't have PM, nothing. It's just basic time. So even though this has 70 hours of power reserve and this only has 38, in all actuality, if your watch dies, it's really not a trouble to get this watch going again. It's not a big deal to try to just wind it up and readjust the time, because it's only 3 hands and you're not even worrying about AM or PM, and it's good to go again. So keep that in mind too as you're thinking about these watches. But if you're someone around magnets a lot, boom, this watch is going to handle that with no problems. This watch, not so much. So hopefully this video helps you decide which watch you would choose. I do want to say that I don't think the differences are enough to jump ship. So if you have this watch, I don't think you should jump ship for this one. And if you have this one, I don't think you should jump ship for the other. But if you are in a position where you are considering buying one, hopefully this video has helped inform you in making your decision. So I would love to hear from you. Which version do you think I should keep? Which version would you keep? Which version do you maybe have? And what do you think about it? How did you land there? I'd love to see that in the comment section below. I want to remind you guys to please like and subscribe to this channel. Like this video and subscribe to this channel, that is. And hopefully I'll be updating the channel with some more content in the future. Thanks so much for listening.